Hey guys, tonight we're stepping backward into a world where winter is not cozy, not romantic, and definitely not something you put on a postcard. You're standing in the Middle Ages, breath already fogging in the air, and before we go any further, here's the reality check. You probably won't survive this, not because you're weak, but because medieval winter doesn't care. It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't pause, and it absolutely doesn't come with central heating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I always like to ask, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Somewhere out there, someone is listening to this under a thick blanket, maybe with a heater humming softly, and that contrast is exactly why tonight's journey works. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes into a medieval winter morning, and the first thing you notice is the cold. Not a sharp, dramatic cold, but a slow, invasive one that's already been here for weeks. It lives in the walls, in the dirt floor beneath your feet, in the damp wool pressed against your skin. This is the kind of cold that never fully leaves. Even when the sun rises, it only takes the edge off, like a promise it doesn't intend to keep. You're a peasant, which means winter is not a season, it's an endurance test. There's no heating system to turn on, no thermostat debate, no extra blanket pulled from a closet. Everything you have is already in use, everything you own is already worn thin. And winter, statistically speaking, is when people like you die most often. Here's a historical fact to ground us right away. Medieval death rates spiked sharply during winter months, not only because of cold itself, but because cold weakened immune systems, spoiled food access, and trapped people indoors with disease. Winter was a multiplier of every existing problem. Your house, if we're generous enough to call it that, is waiting nearby. It's low to the ground, built from wattle and daub, wood smeared with mud, straw and animal dung. The roof sags under the weight of thatch, designed less to keep heat in and more to keep rain out, which it only sometimes succeeds at. There are no windows, not really. Just shutters you can open if you want more light and more cold. You step inside and the temperature barely changes. This is important to understand early. Medieval peasant homes were not warm spaces. They were shelters from wind and snow, not from cold itself. The idea of heating an entire room would have sounded absurd, almost magical. In the centre of the space is a hearth. No chimney, just a fire pit and a hole in the roof where smoke lazily escapes. Or doesn't. You light it if you can afford the fuel, and already you're calculating. How much wood is left? How many weeks until spring? Because once it's gone, it's gone. Fuel scarcity is one of the quiet terrors of winter, and it dictates every decision you make. Here's the quirky detail historians love to mention. Many peasants didn't try to keep the fire burning all day. Instead, they used short, intense bursts of heat. Enough to cook, enough to dry clothes, enough to feel human again, before letting the fire die to conserve fuel. Warmth came in moments, not hours. You notice animals nearby, maybe a cow, a goat, chickens huddled in a corner. This isn't poor hygiene by medieval standards, it's strategy. Animals produce heat. Their breath warms the air. Their bodies radiate life. Sharing space with livestock was one of the most effective heating methods peasants had, even if it came with smells you never fully get used to. Scholars still debate how intentional this arrangement was. Some argue peasants deliberately designed homes to maximize shared heat, while others believe it was simply necessity, later rationalized as wisdom. Either way, the result is the same. You and the animals survive together, or not at all. Your clothing doesn't come off indoors. Ever. Wool tunics, rough and itchy, layered with whatever scraps you own. Linen underneath, if you're lucky. Wool is the miracle fabric of the Middle Ages, retaining heat even when damp, which it often is. This is not fashion, this is insulation, and at night, when darkness arrives early and stays long, you prepare for the most dangerous part of the day. Sleep. Not because sleep is restful, but because it's when your body temperature drops, when fires burn lowest, when people simply don't wake up. Beds are communal. You sleep with family members, sometimes neighbours, sometimes children pressed close, all under heavy blankets stuffed with straw or rags. The goal is simple: trap heat. Personal space is a luxury for warmer centuries. Here's a fringe fact that sounds exaggerated but isn't entirely. People would sometimes wear hats and even shoes to bed to prevent heat loss through extremities. You look ridiculous by modern standards, but you're alive by medieval ones. Outside, the world is silent in that heavy winter way. Snow muffles sound. Fields are frozen. Work doesn't stop, but it slows, shifting indoors when possible. Tools are repaired, nets are mended, stories are told, not for entertainment alone, but to pass time without burning fuel. And through it all, there's an understanding you don't speak aloud. Winter kills. Not dramatically, quietly. One cough that never leaves. One frozen night after food runs thin. One elderly body that simply can't hold heat anymore. Yet, you endure. Millions did. Not comfortably, not safely, but persistently. And that persistence is what we're here to understand tonight. Not just how peasants suffered, but how they survived when survival itself felt optional. You settle deeper, into the rhythm of winter now, aware that this is only the beginning. The cold hasn't even reached its worst yet. You wake again to the same cold, and this time it feels heavier, like it settled on your chest while you slept and decided not to leave. Medieval winter isn't just a weather pattern, it's part of the climate story of the entire era, and you're living inside one of its most unpredictable chapters. You step outside briefly, breath blooming white in the air, and what you're experiencing isn't an anomaly. For much of the Middle Ages, Europe existed in a shifting climate zone that modern historians still argue over. Broadly speaking, there was a warmer stretch known as the medieval warm period, followed later by colder centuries sliding toward what we now call the Little Ice Age. But here's the important part for you, standing ankle deep in frozen mud. Even during warmer medieval centuries, winters could be vicious. A historical fact anchors this moment. Tree ring data and ice core samples show that medieval winters were highly variable, with sudden cold snaps capable of destroying crops and overwhelming communities that had no buffer systems. One bad winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. You don't experience winter as a neat 3-month season. It stretches. Early frosts arrive in autumn, killing late harvests. Snow lingers into spring, delaying planting. The cold isn't politely scheduled, it intrudes, overlaps, and steals time from the growing year. And for peasants, time equals food. You feel this climate uncertainty in how everyone around you behaves. There's tension in conversations, even casual ones. People remember previous winters the way modern people remember disasters. The winter when the river froze solid. The year the cattle died. The winter no one talks about. These memories are passed down not as history lessons, but as warnings. Here's a quirky detail buried in medieval records. Chroniclers often described winters using moral language. A harsh winter wasn't just cold, it was cruel, punishing, or angry. People believed weather reflected divine mood, not atmospheric systems. When snow fell too long, it felt personal. Scholars still debate how much medieval people truly understood long-term climate trends. Some argue peasants recognized patterns, colder decades, shifting seasons, while others say survival required focusing only on the next week, not the next century. You don't have the luxury of abstract thinking. You respond to what's happening now, and right now the ground is frozen solid. That matters more than you might expect. Frozen ground means no digging, no burying the dead easily, no repairing foundations, no latrine pits. Waste accumulates, hygiene collapses, and disease loves winter almost as much as hunger does. You return inside where the dim light barely penetrates the smoke-hazed air. The cold behaves differently here. Outside, it bites. Inside, it seeps. Stone walls, if you're unlucky enough to live near them, hold cold like memory. Wooden structures fare slightly better, but they're drafty, full of gaps you stuff with rags, moss, or whatever you can spare. Here's a fringe fact that surprises people. Medieval homes were often warmer outside on sunny winter days than inside. The sun could warm your body directly, while indoors the cold walls sucked heat away from you relentlessly. Some peasants preferred to sit outdoors when the wind was low, letting the pale sun do what fires couldn't. You learn to read winter the way sailors read the sea. Wind direction matters. Clear nights are colder than cloudy ones. Snow can be insulating, but ice is deadly. Every observation becomes a survival skill. Food ties directly into climate, and winter makes that brutally obvious. A cold year means poor harvests. Poor harvests mean thinner winter stores. Thin stores mean rationing begins early, and once rationing starts, everyone is already losing. Alcohol plays a role here, not as comfort, but as calories. Ale is thick, weak, and consumed daily. It doesn't warm you the way you think it does. Modern science confirms it actually increases heat loss, but it provides energy, hydration, and psychological relief. You feel warmer, and sometimes feeling warmer is enough to keep going. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how often medieval peasants truly starved versus merely endured chronic hunger. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition, but also resilience. You're not always starving, but you're rarely full. Winter pushes that balance toward danger. You notice something else as days shorten. Sound changes. Snow absorbs noise. Villages feel quieter, more isolated. Travel slows. Roads vanish. Rivers freeze or flood unpredictably. Communities turn inward, relying on what they already have and who they already know. Winter also alters time itself. Days are shorter, but nights feel endless. Without artificial light, darkness becomes a presence you plan around. Candles are expensive. Oil is limited. Firelight flickers briefly, then disappears. And yet, you adapt. Humans always do. You schedule life around daylight. You cluster activities. You conserve movement. You sleep more, not out of luxury, but necessity. Your body lowers expectations. Survival becomes quieter, slower, more deliberate. The cold presses in, but it also teaches. It teaches patience. It teaches restraint. It teaches you that warmth, food, and light are not guaranteed features of life. They are victories. As you settle into this understanding, winter stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a condition, a harsh one, an unfair one, but one you now know how to face. And deeper winter is still ahead. You come to understand pretty quickly that survival in winter isn't just about weather, it's about architecture. The shape of your life is dictated by the shape of your home, and as you push open the low doorway again, ducking your head out of habit, you feel exactly how little margin for error medieval peasants had when it came to shelter. Your house is small, not cosy small, but functionally small. One room, maybe two if you're fortunate. The ceiling is low enough that heat, what little there is, doesn't have far to rise. This isn't accidental. Taller rooms waste warmth. Medieval peasants didn't have blueprints or thermodynamics, but they had experience, and experience taught them that compact spaces are easier to endure. A historical fact grounds this scene. Archaeological remains of medieval peasant houses show consistent patterns: low ceilings, narrow footprints, minimal openings, designed primarily to reduce exposure rather than provide comfort. These buildings weren't meant to last centuries, they were meant to last winters. The materials matter. Wattle and daub walls, woven wooden strips plastered with mud, straw and manure, sound flimsy, but they actually provide decent insulation when dry. The problem is winter damp. Rain, snowmelt, and condensation soak everything. Once wet, those walls lose warmth quickly and take forever to dry. You patch cracks constantly. Moss, rags, straw. Anything that blocks drafts gets stuffed into gaps. There's no final version of your house. It's always in progress, always being adjusted to whatever the season throws at it. Stone houses exist, but they're not the upgrade you might imagine. Stone holds cold like a grudge. Once chilled, it radiates that cold day and night. In winter, stone interiors can be colder than the air outside. Peasants in stone structures often cluster around the hearth and abandon the rest of the space entirely. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval floor plans often show people essentially living in one corner of their home during winter, shrinking their usable space to stay warm. The rest of the house becomes storage, shadow, and unused cold. Your floor is dirt. That's not just unpleasant, it's thermal reality. Frozen ground leaches heat constantly. You spread straw not for comfort but insulation. Fresh straw if you have it. Old straw if you don't. Either way, it crunches underfoot, holds moisture, and slowly breaks down beneath you. The roof is thatch, thick, and heavy. Thatch is one of the better insulators available, trapping air and slowing heat loss. It also houses insects, rodents, and occasionally birds. You accept this as the cost of warmth. Winter drives pests indoors, and your home becomes a shared ecosystem whether you like it or not. Smoke lingers everywhere. Without proper chimneys, smoke escapes through roof holes, doors, and sheer stubbornness. Your eyes sting. Your lungs adapt. There's ongoing debate among historians about long-term respiratory damage in medieval populations, but evidence suggests chronic smoke inhalation was simply part of life. The irony is hard to miss. The fire that barely warms you slowly harms you. Furniture is minimal: a table, a bench, a chest. Each item pulls double duty. Chests store clothes and act as seats. Benches become beds. Space is too precious for anything decorative. Here's a fringe fact that feels oddly modern. Some medieval households rearrange furniture seasonally. In winter, everything moves closer to the hearth. In summer, space opens again. Interior design, medieval addition, driven entirely by temperature. Sleeping arrangements reflect this logic. Beds are raised off the ground, sometimes on wooden frames, sometimes on simple platforms. Elevation matters. Cold settles low. Even a foot of height can make a difference. You pile straw mattresses thickly, layering insulation between your body and the earth. Scholars debate how effective these measures truly were. Did medieval homes actually retain meaningful heat, or did they merely slow the inevitable loss? The answer is probably both. You're not warm, but you're warmer than you would be outside, and in winter that difference is everything. You notice how sound behaves inside. The walls muffle wind but amplify crackling, coughing, shifting straw. Night is loud in small spaces. Every movement echoes. Every breath reminds you that others are near, alive, sharing heat. Privacy doesn't exist here, not in the modern sense. But neither does isolation. That closeness becomes another survival tool. Bodies radiate warmth. Presence wards off fear. Winter is easier when endured together. As the wind howls outside, rattling the thatch, you realize something important. Your house isn't a refuge from winter. It's a negotiation with it. A fragile agreement that says, not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. For now, the walls hold, the roof stays, the straw insulates, and that is enough. You settle back near the hearth, feeling the faint warmth on your shins, already knowing that winter has many more lessons to teach you. You start to realize that warmth in the Middle Ages doesn't come from walls or fires alone. It comes from bodies, living ones, breathing ones, and as you shift your weight inside the cramped space, the low, steady sound you hear isn't the wind or the fire, it's the animals. They're closer than you'd ever tolerate today. A cow shifting its bulk, a goat chewing slowly, chickens muttering to themselves in the dark. This isn't chaos, it's planning. In winter, livestock aren't just property or food on legs, they're heating systems. A historical fact anchors this practice. Archaeological evidence and medieval texts confirm that peasants commonly housed animals in the same structure as humans, especially during winter, to conserve heat and protect valuable livestock. Losing an animal to cold could mean starvation months later. You feel their presence immediately. The air is warmer near them, heavy with breath and the sweet sour smell of manure. It's not pleasant, but it's effective. A single cow can produce as much body heat as several humans combined. That heat lingers, trapped by low ceilings and thick thatch. Here's a quirky detail. In some regions, peasants positioned animals deliberately along outer walls, using them as living insulation against the cold wind. You sit closer to the centre, where the air is marginally less brutal. This arrangement isn't without cost. Disease spreads easily between animals and humans. Parasites thrive. Flies, yes, even in winter, find places to survive. But winter forces trade-offs and warmth often wins. Scholars debate whether this practice was universal or region-specific. Some argue it was more common in Northern Europe, where winters were harsher. Others suggest it depended more on household wealth and available space. From where you're standing, theories don't matter. The cow is warm, that's enough. Animals also change your daily rhythm. They need feeding even when fields are frozen. Hay stores shrink alarmingly fast in winter. You ration carefully, knowing that starving livestock now means losing both heat and future food. Nighttime is when the benefits are clearest. As temperatures drop, animals continue to radiate warmth. Their slow breathing creates a strange sense of security. You're not alone in the cold. Something alive is nearby, sharing the burden. Here's a fringe fact that sounds almost unbelievable. Some medieval peasants slept directly beside livestock during extreme cold snaps, separated only by a low barrier or bundle of straw. It wasn't affection, it was survival math. Your senses adapt. Smells fade into background. Sounds become familiar. You learn which animal movements mean nothing and which signal trouble. Winter sharpens attention. Every small detail matters more when mistakes cost energy. Or life. There's also emotional comfort here, though no one would frame it that way. Animals represent continuity. If the cow lives through winter, there will be milk. If the chickens survive, there will be eggs. They are hope with hooves and feathers. The open scholarly debate here centres on health versus heat. Did living with animals shorten lives through disease, or lengthen them through warmth and nutrition security? Evidence suggests both. Survival often meant trading long-term health for immediate life. You watch condensation form in the air, breath mixing with animal steam, creating a low fog near the ceiling. The fire has died down again, fuel must be saved. But the space doesn't plunge into total cold. The animals fill the gap. Winter outside rages on, but inside there's a fragile equilibrium. Humans, animals, fire remnants, straw and breath all contribute to a shared microclimate. It's crude, it's uncomfortable, and it works just well enough. As you settle near the warm flank of the cow, you understand something fundamental about medieval survival. Independence is a myth. Winter demands cooperation between people, between species, between every living thing under the same roof. And tomorrow, when you wake again to the same cold, the animals will still be there, breathing, waiting, helping you endure one more day. You notice the fire before you feel it. A faint orange pulse in the dimness, barely alive, like it's deciding whether today is worth the effort. This is the hearth, the emotional centre of your winter life, and also one of its great disappointments. Despite everything you've heard about roaring medieval fires, this thing is not heating your home. It's barely negotiating with the cold. A historical fact grounds this moment. Most medieval peasant hearths were open fires without chimneys, meaning heat escaped upward while smoke filled the room. Only a fraction of the fire's energy actually warmed people, and even that warmth was uneven and temporary. You crouch near it anyway. Everyone does. Heat is directional here. One side of your body warms, the other stays cold. You rotate slowly like food on a spit, timing it so you don't waste the moment. This is not comfort, it's strategy. Fuel dictates everything. Firewood doesn't magically appear. It's gathered, stolen, bartered or rationed. In many regions, peasants had limited legal access to forests, restricted by lords who enforced wood rights. You're allowed dead wood, maybe fallen branches, but not healthy trees. Winter turns that rule into a gamble. Here's a quirky detail hidden in manorial records. Some peasants deliberately burned less efficient fuels. Peat, dung, even dried straw. Because wood was too valuable to waste on warmth alone. Cooking always came first. Heat was secondary. The fire's main job isn't heating the room. It cooks food. It dries clothes. It keeps water from freezing solid. Warmth for bodies is almost a side effect. Once the cooking's done, the fire often dies back to embers to conserve fuel. Smoke becomes a constant companion. Your eyes sting. Your throat scratches. Soot coats everything. But smoke also preserves food hanging from rafters and deters insects. Like everything else in winter, it's a trade-off. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval fires were intentionally kept small for fuel efficiency or simply couldn't burn larger due to hearth design. Experimental archaeology suggests even large fires in open hearths lost most heat straight upward. Either way, you don't dream of a blazing fire. You dream of one that lasts. You learn to read embers the way others read clocks. Red means usable heat. Grey means gone. You bank coals carefully at night, covering them with ash to keep them alive until morning. If you fail, relighting costs fuel and time and warmth you don't have. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost magical. Some households shared embers between neighbours, carrying glowing coals in clay pots to restart fires without sparks. Fire itself becomes a communal resource in winter. You warm stones near the hearth, then carry them to beds, wrapping them in cloth to avoid burns. It's crude, dangerous, and surprisingly effective. Too hot, and you blister. Too cool, and it's useless. Winter teaches precision. Despite all this, the room never truly warms. The walls stay cold. The floor stays frozen. Heat rises and disappears. The hearth is a point of resistance, not a solution, and yet it's everything. Without it, water freezes, food can't cook, morale collapses. Fire isn't about luxury. It's about keeping life moving when everything else wants to stop. You watch the flames flicker low, aware that this fire will go out long before winter does. Tomorrow, you'll light it again. Carefully, sparingly, hopefully. The hearth doesn't defeat the cold, but it gives you just enough warmth to keep fighting it. By now, you've learned that winter isn't defeated in grand gestures. It's endured in small calculations, and nothing forces more careful math than fuel. As you step outside again, wrapped in stiff wool, the question isn't whether you're cold. You always are. The question is whether you can afford warmth today. Fuel is the invisible backbone of medieval survival. Wood, peat, charcoal, dried dung, each has a role, each has limits, and winter stretches those limits thin. A historical fact sets the stakes. In much of medieval Europe, access to firewood was legally restricted. Peasants depended on common rights to gather deadwood, but cutting live trees could bring fines or worse. As forests shrank, winters grew harder. You scan the ground for fallen branches, knowing you're not alone. Everyone else is looking too. By midwinter, the forest floor is picked clean. What remains is damp, brittle, or too small to burn well. Each piece you carry home feels precious, even if it barely feeds the fire. Here's a quirky detail buried in estate records. Some peasants hoarded fuel the way others hoarded food, hiding bundles of wood under straw or burying peat blocks to protect them from theft. Warmth could be stolen as easily as grain. Peat becomes crucial in certain regions. Dug from bogs and dried months earlier, it burns slowly and smokes heavily. It doesn't produce much heat, but it lasts. In winter, longevity matters more than intensity. Dung is another option, especially where wood is scarce. Dried animal manure burns surprisingly well. The smell is awful, the smoke is thick, but it keeps water liquid and food cooking. You don't complain, you adapt. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about fuel hierarchy. Did peasants prefer certain fuels, or did availability dictate everything? Evidence suggests preference mattered less than proximity. You burned whatever you could get without punishment. Fuel scarcity shapes daily life. You delay cooking until absolutely necessary. You eat cold food more often than you'd like. You cluster tasks to minimize relighting fires. Even conversation changes. People sit closer, speak less, move carefully to conserve energy. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost cruel. Some medieval households intentionally let rooms freeze entirely, retreating into a single heated corner for weeks at a time. The rest of the house becomes dead space, unused, unheated, abandoned until spring. You feel the psychological weight of fuel anxiety. Every log burned today is one you won't have tomorrow. Every unnecessary flame feels like guilt. Winter turns warmth into a moral decision. And yet, despite the scarcity, people share. A neighbour whose fire has gone out may receive embers. A widow may be given peat. Community rules soften when winter threatens everyone. Survival becomes collective, whether officially acknowledged or not. The debate among historians continues. Did fuel shortages contribute more to winter deaths than cold itself? The answer is likely yes. Cold can be endured. Cold without fire cannot. You return inside with your meagre haul, already planning how to stretch it. The fire gets a few pieces, no more. You watch carefully, adjusting airflow, coaxing life from embers. Outside, the wind rises. Inside, the temperature barely shifts, but the fire holds. For tonight, that's enough. You settle back into the rhythm of conservation, knowing that winter is a long series of nights like this. Each one survived not by abundance but by restraint. By now, you understand that walls, fires, and animals only do so much. The rest of your survival is wrapped directly around your body. Clothing isn't an accessory here, it's architecture. It's portable shelter. And in winter, what you wear matters almost as much as where you sleep. You adjust the layers instinctively, because you've been doing this your whole life. Linen closest to the skin if you have it, already worn thin from years of washing and repair. Over that wool, always wool. Coarse, heavy, sometimes itchy enough to drive you half mad, but unmatched in its ability to hold warmth even when damp. A historical fact anchors this truth. Wool was the primary winter fabric for medieval peasants, because its crimped fibres trap air, providing insulation even in wet conditions, something linen and leather simply couldn't do. Without wool, winter survival rates would have been far worse. You don't own many clothes. Most peasants had one main outfit and maybe a spare if they were fortunate. Winter doesn't bring a new wardrobe, it brings constant maintenance. You patch holes, you darn seams, you reinforce elbows and knees. Clothing failure in winter isn't embarrassing, it's dangerous. Here's a quirky detail that often surprises people. Medieval peasants sometimes slept in their daytime clothes not out of laziness, but to keep garments warm and dry. Putting on frozen clothes in the morning could steal body heat fast enough to make you dizzy. Your cloak is your most valuable item. It's thick, heavy, and smells faintly of smoke. During the day it blocks wind. At night it becomes a blanket. In emergencies it's a bedroll. Losing it would be catastrophic. Hats matter more than you expect. Heat escapes quickly from the head, and medieval people knew this through experience, not biology textbooks. Wool caps, hoods, and scarves are worn indoors and out. There's no social rule against it. Warmth outranks manners. Footwear is a constant problem. Leather shoes don't insulate well, and once wet, they're almost impossible to dry fully. You stuff them with straw. You wrap feet in cloth. You keep them near the hearth, not too close, or the leather hardens and cracks. Here's a fringe fact that feels oddly clever. Some peasants crafted removable straw insoles, replacing them daily to keep feet marginally warmer and drier. It wasn't comfortable, but it worked. There's an open scholarly debate about how much medieval clothing actually improved winter survival versus simply slowed heat loss. Skeletal evidence shows frost damage and circulation issues were common, suggesting clothing helped, but not enough to prevent suffering entirely. You feel that truth in your fingers. Gloves exist, but they're crude and limit dexterity. You often work barehanded, warming fingers by breath or friction. Cold stiffens joints. Tools slip. Winter injuries heal slowly, if at all. Children wear scaled-down versions of adult clothing, often threadbare. They grow quickly, outpacing garments. You see sleeves that don't reach wrists, hems that barely cover knees. Cold doesn't care about size. And yet there's pride here. Clothing represents labour, skill and survival. Spinning, weaving, sewing. These are winter tasks that keep hands busy and bodies alive. Every stitch is a small act of resistance against the season. At night you pile clothing on the bed, layering fabric the way others layer walls. You pull the cloak tight. You tuck in edges. You breathe slowly, conserving warmth. Clothing doesn't make winter comfortable. It makes it survivable. It buys you time. And in medieval winter, time is the most valuable thing you have. You settle into sleep again, wrapped in wool and hope, knowing the cold will still be there when you wake. But so will you. Night falls early now, and with it comes the most dangerous test of winter: sleeping. Not because rest is indulgent, but because stillness lets the cold creep closer. As you prepare for bed, every movement is deliberate, every choice shaped by the simple question, will this keep me alive until morning? You don't undress. No one does. Clothing stays on, layers adjusted, but never removed. The air is already colder than it was an hour ago, and the fire has been reduced to embers, banked carefully under ash. Relighting it in the middle of the night would waste fuel and risk fire. A historical fact anchors this ritual. Medieval people often slept in shifts or semi-woke states during winter nights, tending fires or checking on animals, because uninterrupted sleep could be dangerous if temperatures dropped suddenly. The bed itself is less a piece of furniture and more a heat trap. Raised slightly off the ground, it keeps you out of the coldest air. The mattress is straw, fresh if possible, mouldy if not. Straw compresses over time, losing insulation, so it must be fluffed and replaced often. You do this before lying down, redistributing what little warmth it can offer. Here's a quirky detail that sounds uncomfortable because it is. Beds are often shared with multiple people, sometimes entire families. Body heat is the goal, privacy is irrelevant. Winter erases social boundaries quickly. You arrange yourselves carefully. Children in the middle, elderly near the warmest bodies, blankets pulled tight, edges tucked to prevent drafts, cloaks added on top. Every gap is an invitation for cold. Breath fogs in the darkness. You pull fabric over your mouth to warm the air before it reaches your lungs. Breathing cold air all night can trigger coughing fits that linger for weeks. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost ritualistic. Some households placed heated stones or bricks at the foot of the bed, wrapped in cloth. They cooled quickly, but for a short while, they made falling asleep easier. Sometimes that was enough. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much sleep medieval peasants actually got in winter. Fragmented sleep patterns were common, not just culturally but biologically. Cold, darkness, and responsibility kept people in a light, alert rest rather than deep sleep. You feel that now. You drift, but you don't disappear. Every sound pulls you back. Wind in the thatch, an animal shifting, someone coughing. Winter keeps you half awake, half guarding your own life. Children struggle the most. Their smaller bodies lose heat faster. You press them closer, adjusting blankets instinctively. Old age struggles too. Bodies that can't generate enough warmth fade quietly in winter nights. The room smells of smoke, straw, wool, and breath. It's not unpleasant anymore. It's familiar. Survival has a scent. Outside, frost creeps along the walls. Inside, you hold your ground. Barely. You wake briefly in the night to check embers. They're still glowing faintly. Relief washes through you, small but real. Morning will come. Sleeping in medieval winter isn't restorative. It's strategic. You're not dreaming of comfort. You're dreaming of daylight. And eventually, after hours that feel longer than they are, pale light leaks in through cracks in the walls. You made it. Again. Morning arrives quietly, not with warmth, but with light, and you wake already tired. Winter sleep never fully restores you. It only pauses the cold long enough to let you continue. As you sit up, the straw mattress shifts beneath you, releasing a faint, dusty smell that reminds you how important this humble material really is. Straw is everywhere in your life, but in winter it becomes essential. Not just bedding, insulation, flooring, padding, even emergency fuel. Without straw, the cold would reach you faster and stay longer. A historical fact anchors this reality. Medieval agricultural records show straw was carefully rationed during winter, competing with livestock feed and roofing needs. Using it for warmth was a calculated sacrifice. You shake out the mattress, redistributing compressed areas. Straw breaks down quickly, turning brittle and cold. Fresh straw is warmer, but replacing it too often risks running out before spring. You balance comfort against survival. Here's a quirky detail many people miss. Straw bedding wasn't meant to be soft. It was meant to trap air. A lumpy mattress was actually better at holding warmth than a flattened one. Comfort was secondary to function. Straw also lines the floor. Bare earth would suck heat straight from your body. The layer beneath your feet dulls that effect, though it never fully stops it. When the straw becomes too damp or filthy, it's replaced or added to manure piles. Nothing is wasted. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how hygienic straw bedding truly was. Parasites thrived in it, but replacing straw too often wasn't always possible. Winter forced people to tolerate conditions that modern minds find unbearable. You notice how straw changes the sound of the room. Footsteps are muffled, movements softened. It creates a strange quiet, one that feels safer in winter, when loud sounds mean energy lost. Straw plays a role outside the house too, bundled against walls, packed into gaps, layered over roots in storage pits. It insulates food, keeping vegetables from freezing solid. It's not glamorous, but it works. Here's a fringe fact that sounds almost clever. In extreme cold, some peasants wrapped straw around water containers to slow freezing. It didn't stop ice entirely, but it bought precious hours. You shake straw from your cloak and prepare for the day. Cold still dominates, but the bedding did its job. You're alive, barely warm but functional. Children help fluff bedding, elders inspect it. Winter turns even the smallest tasks into survival chores. Neglect anything, and the cold takes advantage. Straw smells like earth and dryness and decay. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. It reminds you that survival here is built from leftovers, from what the harvest didn't want. As you step back toward the hearth, you carry armfuls of straw to patch gaps and reinforce walls. This isn't busy work, it's defense. Winter hasn't eased. It may not for months, but straw, humble, scratchy, endlessly useful, stands between you and the frozen ground. And for now, that thin line is enough. By the time hunger reminds you it exists, the cold has already done its work. You feel it in the stiffness of your joints, the heaviness in your limbs. Food isn't just nourishment in winter, it's fuel, the kind your body burns just to stay warm. You move toward the hearth as something thick simmers slowly, using as little fire as possible. Meals are planned around heat efficiency. One pot, one fire, maximum calories. A historical fact grounds this moment. Medieval peasants relied heavily on high-calorie, carbohydrate-dense foods during winter, grains, legumes, and preserved fats. Because maintaining body temperature required significantly more energy in cold conditions, bread is everything. Dark, dense, often coarse with bran. It fills the stomach and burns slowly. You eat it with whatever you have. Onions, cheese, salted meat if you're lucky. Fresh food is gone. Winter belongs to preservation. Pottage bubbles gently. A thick stew of grains, beans, and scraps of meat or fat. It changes daily, depending on what's left. You eat it hot when possible, not for taste, but for warmth. The heat spreads briefly through your chest, then fades. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval peasants often ate the same stew continuously, adding ingredients day after day. It wasn't a single meal. It was a living pot. In winter, this saved fuel and effort. Fat matters more than flavour. Lard, butter, drippings. Anything that adds energy is prized. Thin meals mean faster heat loss. You feel the difference immediately. Alcohol plays its role here too. Weak ale, drunk daily, provides calories and safer hydration than water. It feels warming, even if it isn't. The illusion is comforting. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how nutritionally adequate medieval winter diets truly were. Some evidence suggests peasants survived on marginal calories for months, operating in a state of constant energy deficit. Winter was less about eating well, and more about not collapsing. You see this in faces around you. Cheeks hollowed slightly, movements slower. No one wastes energy. Even chewing feels deliberate. Children get priority when possible. Elders sometimes eat less without comment. Winter decisions are rarely spoken aloud. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost desperate. In extreme shortages, peasants sometimes boiled leather scraps or ground bark into flour substitutes. These foods provided little nutrition, but they filled the stomach and eased hunger's edge. Food storage is a constant worry. Grain bins are checked obsessively. Mold is scraped away and ignored. Hunger makes people pragmatic. Meals are quiet affairs. Talking burns energy. Eating warms briefly. Afterward, the cold returns, stronger by contrast. And yet food gives rhythm to winter days. It marks time. It gives you something to plan around, something to look forward to. You scrape the bowl clean, not out of politeness, but necessity. Every calorie matters. As you sit back, stomach heavy, body slightly warmer, you understand something deeply medieval. In winter, survival isn't about comfort. It's about enough. Enough food. Enough heat. Enough strength to see another morning. And for today, enough has arrived. The warmth from the meal fades faster than you want it to, and as it does, someone reaches for the jug. Thick, cloudy ale sloshes into wooden cups, and for a brief moment winter feels less sharp. You take a swallow, and there it is. That spreading sensation in your chest. The familiar illusion that something inside you has finally pushed back against the cold. Ale is part of daily life, not a treat. Children drink weak versions, adults drink more. It's safer than water, easier to store and packed with calories. In winter, it feels essential. A historical fact anchors this habit. Medieval peasants consumed ale daily, often several litres, because brewing killed pathogens and produced a calorie-rich drink that supplemented scarce winter diets. The belief is simple. Drink makes you warm. You feel it immediately. Your cheeks flush, fingers tingle, muscles loosen. For a short while, winter seems manageable. Here's the truth no one knows yet. Alcohol widens blood vessels, pulling heat to the skin while actually increasing overall heat loss. You feel warmer while your core temperature drops. But in the Middle Ages, feelings are evidence, and this feeling is powerful. Here's a quirky detail tucked into medieval folklore. Some people believed ale contained inner fire, a substance that strengthened the body against cold spirits and winter demons. Drinking wasn't indulgence, it was protection. Scholars still debate how aware medieval people were of alcohol's dangers in winter. Some medical texts warned against excessive drinking in cold weather, noting fatigue and vulnerability afterward. But those warnings rarely reached peasants, or were ignored when hunger and cold pressed harder. You notice moderation without theory. Too much ale makes you sluggish. Slower movements mean more cold. So you pace yourself, guided by experience rather than science. Ale also plays a social role. It loosens tongues during long winter evenings, making stories flow when energy is low. Laughter, brief and quiet, carries warmth of a different kind. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost modern. Some winter ales were brewed stronger on purpose, not just for taste, but to increase calorie content. Nutrition disguised as comfort. You sip slowly, aware the jug must last. Brewing stops in deep winter when water freezes and fuel is scarce. What's left must carry you through. The warmth fades again, predictable now. You pull your cloak tighter, disappointed, but not surprised. Ale didn't save you, but it helped you endure the moment. Winter survival is full of these half solutions. Things that don't fix the problem, only soften it. Alcohol is one of them. As the cup empties, you feel both lighter and colder. The illusion lifts, reality returns. And still, when the jug comes around again tomorrow, you'll drink. Not because it works, but because winter is easier when something briefly tells you it does. Winter doesn't pause work. It reshapes it, compresses it, and makes every task heavier. As morning light strengthens, such as it does in winter, you step back outside knowing there's no choice. If you stop moving entirely, the cold wins faster. Fields lie frozen and silent, but labour continues. Fences need repair. Animals need feeding. Tools need mending. Firewood must be gathered whenever possible. Idleness isn't rest, it's risk. A historical fact grounds this routine. Medieval peasants worked year-round, with winter labour shifting indoors when possible but never fully stopping, because survival depended on constant maintenance of tools, animals and supplies. You feel the cold immediately. Wind cuts through wool. Fingers stiffen. You breathe through fabric to warm the air before it reaches your lungs. Every movement takes more effort than it should. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval people believed constant motion generated inner heat, and in a way, they were right. Movement keeps blood flowing. Standing still in winter is dangerous. Outdoor work is carefully timed. You go out during the warmest part of the day, even if warm is relative. Tasks are planned to minimize exposure. Mistakes cost energy you can't replace. Indoors, winter work fills long hours, spinning wool, repairing nets, sharpening blades. These tasks keep hands busy and minds occupied. They also keep bodies slightly warmer through motion. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how physically demanding medieval winters truly were compared to summers. Some argue winter allowed relative rest. Others point out that cold dramatically increases energy expenditure, making even light work exhausting. You feel that truth in your bones. Lifting feels heavier, walking feels slower. Cold steals strength quietly. Here's a fringe fact that sounds almost counterintuitive. Some peasants intentionally avoided heavy sweating in winter because wet clothes increased heat loss and could be deadly. Work was paced carefully to avoid both freezing and overheating. Children contribute as soon as they're able, carrying straw, watching animals, fetching water when it hasn't frozen solid. Winter teaches responsibility early. Accidents happen more often now. Numb fingers slip, tools fall, cuts heal slowly. Infection is a constant threat when bodies are weakened by cold and hunger. As daylight fades early, work stops not because it's finished, but because it's no longer possible. Darkness and cold arrive together, forcing retreat. You return indoors, breath shallow, limbs aching. The fire is coaxed back to life. Hands are warmed carefully, not too fast or pain blooms. Winter labour doesn't build, it preserves. It keeps things from falling apart completely. And as you settle again near the hearth, you understand that survival here isn't heroic. It's repetitive, relentless. Series of small efforts that, together, keep winter from claiming you today. Cold changes water in ways that dominate your day. You don't think about hydration the way modern people do. You think about access. Because in winter, water doesn't flow. It locks itself away. You step toward the well or stream cautiously, already knowing what you'll find. Ice. Thick, opaque, stubborn. Water is there, but it's sealed beneath a barrier you must break every single day. A historical fact anchors this struggle. Medieval winter records frequently mention frozen wells and streams, forcing communities to develop daily routines for ice breaking and water rationing. You bring tools, not refined ones, just iron-tipped poles or heavy stones. Breaking ice is labour-intensive and dangerous. One slip, one misstep, and you're soaked. Wet clothing in winter is a serious threat. You work carefully, slowly. Here's a quirky detail. Some villages assign specific people to ice-breaking duties, rotating the risk. Water access wasn't individual, it was communal survival. Once the ice is broken, you draw water quickly before it seals again. Buckets are heavy. Cold bites through handles. You don't linger. Back inside, water must be protected. You store it near the hearth, insulated with straw or cloth. Even then, a skin of ice forms overnight. You chip it away in the morning, resigned. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how often medieval people bathed in winter. Evidence suggests very rarely, not from ignorance, but necessity. Water use was prioritised for drinking and cooking. Bathing risked exposure and illness. Here's a fringe fact that feels strange but practical. Some medieval medical texts advised against washing in winter, claiming it opened pores to cold spirits. The advice conveniently aligned with survival realities. Animals complicate water needs. They require constant supply. You haul more, risking more exposure. Winter multiplies every chore. Snow sometimes substitutes. Melted carefully, slowly, it provides water when sources freeze completely. But melting snow takes fuel, and fuel is scarce. You weigh options constantly. Water affects health deeply in winter. Dehydration weakens bodies, but drinking too much cold water chills you from the inside. Warm drinks are preferred, even if they taste terrible. You notice how winter shrinks the world. Distance to water feels longer. Every trip is a decision. Every bucket is effort. As darkness falls again, water is secured. Barely. You've won another small battle. In medieval winter, survival isn't about dramatic moments. It's about quiet victories over ice, repeated daily until spring returns. By the heart of winter, you start to notice that cold doesn't just make life harder. It makes bodies weaker. Illness moves differently now. Slower, quieter, more persistent. You don't see sudden outbreaks the way summer sometimes brings. Instead, winter sickness settles in and refuses to leave. You hear it before you see it. Coughing in the night, long wet sounds that echo through small houses, sniffles that turn into chest pain, fevers that burn while the room stays freezing. A historical fact anchors this danger. Medieval mortality records show winter as a peak season for deaths, not only from exposure, but from respiratory illnesses like pneumonia, bronchitis and tuberculosis, all worsened by cold, smoke-filled homes and malnutrition. The cold weakens resistance. Hunger lowers immunity. Smoke irritates lungs already struggling to pull warmth from icy air. Every survival tactic has a cost, and winter collects them all at once. Here's a quirky detail hidden in medieval medical belief. Illness in winter was often blamed on bad humours trapped inside the body by cold air. Treatments focused on balance, warming foods, heated stones, and sometimes bloodletting, which rarely helped and often harmed. You don't have medicine in the modern sense. You have herbs, prayers, and routine. Warmth is the primary treatment, but warmth is scarce. A sick person is moved closer to the hearth. Others give up that space without complaint. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how contagious medieval winter illnesses truly were, versus how much death came from weakened bodies simply failing. Evidence suggests both mattered. Crowded living conditions spread disease, but cold and hunger decided who survived it. Children fade quickly when sick, elderly people even faster. Winter makes those losses feel inevitable, almost expected. Grief is quieter now. Energy is too precious for wailing. Here's a fringe fact that feels chilling. Some medieval households prepared shrouds in winter not out of pessimism, but practicality. Frozen ground made burial difficult. Death required planning. You notice how sickness changes behaviour. People move less, speak less, share more carefully. Winter teaches caution the hard way. The church offers comfort, sometimes warmth, but also risk. Crowding spreads illness, yet isolation feels worse. You weigh spiritual need against physical danger. When someone recovers, it feels miraculous. When they don't, it feels like winter doing what winter does. Harsh, but familiar. You pull your cloak tighter, instinctively. Not just against cold, but against what cold invites. Winter doesn't just threaten life directly. It weakens the defences that keep life going. And every day you remain standing, breathing, moving. You've already beaten the odds a little more. By this point in winter, you've learned a quiet truth. No one survives it alone. Individual effort matters, but community decides who makes it through the cold months and who doesn't. Survival is shared, negotiated, and sometimes argued over, but it's never solitary. You feel this most clearly when something goes wrong. A fire goes out. An animal falls sick. A family runs low on grain. Winter exposes weakness fast, and when it does, neighbours notice. A historical fact grounds this interdependence. Medieval village life was structured around mutual obligation, especially in winter, with shared labour, food aid, and resource pooling often determining survival during harsh seasons. You see it in small gestures. A bundle of peat left quietly at a door, extra straw shared without comment, embers carried across the village so a hearth doesn't go cold. These acts aren't charity in the modern sense, they're insurance. You help now because you may need help later. Here's a quirky detail buried in village customs. Winter was often when disputes were set aside temporarily. Feuds could wait, cold couldn't. Survival took priority over pride. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how formalised winter aid truly was. Some historians argue it was regulated through manorial systems and church oversight. Others believe it operated mostly through informal social pressure and shared fear. From where you stand, it feels instinctive rather than organised. You also feel the limits of community. Resources are finite. Help isn't endless. When winter is mild, generosity flows. When it's harsh, decisions become harder. Who gets fed? Who gets fuel? These choices are rarely spoken aloud, but everyone feels them. Children are watched more closely. Elders are checked on. Widows and the sick draw attention. Not always kind, but necessary. Winter reduces privacy. Everyone knows everyone else's condition. Here's a fringe fact that feels uncomfortably real. In extreme winters, some villages practiced quiet triage, prioritising those most likely to survive. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival math. Church bells ring more often in winter, funerals cluster, but churches also become places of warmth, shared space and reassurance. Stone walls hold cold, but bodies gathered together raise the temperature slightly. It's enough to matter. You sit closer to others now, both physically and emotionally. Isolation feels dangerous. Even silence is shared. Community doesn't eliminate winter's threat. It dilutes it. It spreads risk across many shoulders. As night falls again, you listen to sounds beyond your own house. Coughs, doors, distant voices. Life persists around you, fragile but collective. Winter is still winning many battles, but together you're still here, and sometimes that's victory enough. At some point in winter, the cold drives you towards stone, not because it's warm, but because it's constant. You pull your cloak tighter and make your way toward the church, its shape rising out of the pale landscape like something carved from the season itself. Stone churches dominate medieval villages, and in winter they take on a strange new role. They are not heated spaces, far from it. Stone holds cold stubbornly, and the air inside often feels just as frigid as outdoors. But what the church offers isn't warmth. Exactly. It's shelter, scale, and people. A historical fact anchors this scene. Medieval churches often served as communal gathering spaces during winter, hosting not just religious services but meetings, shelter, and occasional relief efforts organised by clergy or local lords. You step inside, and the temperature barely changes, but the wind stops. Snow doesn't reach you here. That alone feels like relief. Candles flicker weakly, expensive points of light rationed carefully. The smell is familiar: wax, stone dust, damp wool, breath. People gather close together. Bodies cluster in pews or stand shoulder to shoulder during services. It's not intentional heating, but it works. The air warms slightly. You notice it most when you leave later. Here's a quirky detail that surprises many historians. Medieval congregations sometimes complained about churches being too cold, petitioning clergy to shorten winter services. Faith had limits when fingers went numb. The church also acts as a psychological refuge. Winter shrinks the world. Roads vanish. Travel becomes rare. The church remains a fixed point, a place that doesn't change when everything else feels uncertain. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much material aid churches actually provided peasants during winter. Some records show organised almsgiving and grain distribution. Others suggest spiritual comfort mattered more than physical relief. Standing here, you understand both mattered, but neither was guaranteed. Sermons in winter often focus on endurance, patience, suffering as a test. These messages resonate differently now. Cold makes theology feel immediate. Survival itself feels like an act of faith. Here's a fringe fact drawn from monastic rules. Monks in unheated cloisters were often allowed extra clothing in winter, an exception that tells you just how punishing stone buildings could be. If even monks struggled, peasants knew not to expect comfort. You linger longer than necessary, not because it's warm, but because it's still. No wind, no work, just breath and quiet voices. When you finally step back outside, the cold hits again immediately. But you notice something subtle. You're steadier, centred. Winter hasn't changed, but you've adjusted. The church doesn't save you from winter. It gives you a pause inside it. And sometimes, a pause is enough to keep going. As winter stretches on, you start to notice something subtle but important. This cold is not the same everywhere. Even without maps or weather charts, you understand that survival looks different depending on where you stand. Winter has regional accents, and each one changes how people endure it. If you're in the north, Scandinavia, the Scottish Highlands, parts of the Baltic, the cold is sharper, longer, more predictable in its cruelty. Snow piles deep and stays. Darkness lingers. But there's an odd advantage in that consistency. People here expect winter. Homes are built tighter. Clothing is heavier. Firewood stores are planned months ahead. A historical fact anchors this contrast. Archaeological and written evidence shows that northern medieval communities often had better cold-adapted housing and clothing, while southern regions were more vulnerable to sudden, unfamiliar cold snaps. Move south, and winter becomes trickier. In places like France, Italy, or Iberia, cold is less constant but more deceptive. Houses are built to stay cool in summer, not warm in winter. Stone walls dominate. Fireplaces are fewer. When severe cold arrives, it hits harder because infrastructure isn't designed for it. Here's a quirky detail historians love to point out. In medieval Italy, people sometimes suffered more during cold winters than those farther north, precisely because they lacked insulation and winter habits. Familiarity bred resilience. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether climate or culture mattered more for winter survival. Did colder regions fare better because of environment-driven adaptation, or because social systems evolved around long winters? The answer, as usual, is both, and you can feel it depending on where you stand. Coastal regions experience a different challenge. Damp cold creeps into everything. Wet wool weighs more. Fires struggle to stay lit. Mould grows even in winter. You don't freeze as dramatically, but you ache constantly. Mountain communities face isolation. Snow closes passes. Villages disappear from one another for months. Survival depends almost entirely on preparation. If stores run low, there's no help coming. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost unfair. Some medieval trade routes shut down completely in winter, meaning regions dependent on imported grain were especially vulnerable. Geography could decide life or death. You realise winter also shapes behaviour differently. Northern communities hold more winter festivals, breaking darkness with ritual and light. Southern ones struggle through shorter but harsher cold snaps with less cultural buffer. Children notice these differences less than adults. Cold is cold to them. But elders talk, comparing winters, remembering past years, arguing whether this one is worse. Memory becomes a regional survival tool. No matter where you are, winter demands adaptation. Those who adjust endure. Those who don't suffer first. As you stand in your particular corner of medieval Europe, you understand something quietly profound. Peasants didn't survive winter because it was easy. They survived because, wherever they lived, they learned exactly how winter behaved there. And that knowledge, passed down without books or charts, kept them alive. Winter shows its cruelty most clearly in the smallest bodies. You see it every day, in the way children move closer to the fire without being told, in how adults instinctively pull them back into the centre of shared beds, in the constant quiet watching. Children lose heat faster. Their limbs are thinner, their energy reserves smaller. Winter does not care how young someone is. Historical fact anchors this harsh truth. Medieval child mortality spiked during winter months, with cold, malnutrition, and respiratory illness combining into the most dangerous season of early life. You watch children layered in wool that never quite fits, sleeves too short, cloaks passed down through siblings. Growth outpaces clothing faster than families can replace it. Cold finds the gaps. Here's a quirky detail drawn from household accounts. Children were sometimes given priority access to the warmest bed positions and thickest cloaks, not out of sentimentality but survival logic. They were easier to save, and represented the future labour of the household. Winter play looks different. There's less running, more huddling, games are quieter, closer to the hearth. Laughter still happens, but it's brief, quickly swallowed by cold air. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how aware medieval parents were of germ theory versus environmental causes of illness. Evidence suggests they recognised patterns, cold weather, sickness, death, even if they didn't know why. Protection focused on warmth and food, not isolation. You notice how adults sacrifice without discussion. Smaller portions, colder spots near the door. Children are pulled inward. Elders step back. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost unbearably tender. Some medieval lullabies reference cold directly, sung not just to soothe, but to keep children calm and breathing steadily in freezing rooms. When children fall ill, fear tightens the room. Remedies are tried, prayers whispered, extra straw piled on beds. Survival becomes collective effort. Not all children make it through winter. Loss is common enough that it changes how grief is expressed, short, quiet, carried forward. Spring births are celebrated not just for life but for survival. You hold a child closer now, feeling the faint warmth through layers of wool. Their breath fogs the air. They sleep lightly, twitching at every sound. Winter shapes childhood here. It teaches closeness. It teaches awareness. It teaches that warmth is something you make together. And when a child survives winter, they carry that lesson forward, etched into memory and instinct. How to endure cold by staying close. Winter treats age differently. Where children struggle because they are small, the elderly struggle because they are tired. You see it in the way older bodies move more slowly now, in how they linger near the fire longer, in how they speak less, conserving breath and strength. Cold strips away margins, joints stiffen, circulation weakens, bones ache constantly. What was manageable in summer becomes dangerous in winter. A historical fact anchors this quiet threat. Medieval mortality among the elderly rose sharply in winter months, as aging bodies struggled to regulate temperature and recover from even minor illnesses. You notice how elders are positioned within the home, closest to the hearth, furthest from doors, given thicker bedding when possible. These choices are made without ceremony. Everyone understands what winter does to aging flesh. Here's a quirky detail found in medieval household advice texts. Older people were encouraged to eat warmer foods and drink more spiced beverages in winter, believed to rekindle inner heat. It wasn't science, but it was compassionate instinct. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how respected elders truly were during harsh winters. Some historians argue they were protected and valued for knowledge and childcare. Others suggest winter forced grim decisions when resources were scarce. Both realities likely existed side by side. You feel the tension when food runs low. Elders sometimes eat less, quietly, without announcement. It's framed as appetite loss, but everyone knows the truth. Winter demands sacrifice, and those closest to the end often offer it first. Here's a fringe fact that feels painfully human. Some medieval wills were updated in winter, not because death was certain, but because cold sharpened awareness of it. Winter made people practical. When elders fall ill, recovery is rare. Coughs linger, weakness deepens. The body doesn't bounce back the way it once did. Winter exposes the limits of endurance, yet elders are not passive. They tell stories in the evenings, keeping minds active when bodies can't move much. They watch children, freeing others for work. Knowledge becomes warmth of a different kind. You sit near one now, listening as they describe winters past. Worse ones, colder ones, years when snow buried doorways. Whether the stories are true doesn't matter. They remind you that winter has been survived before. As days shorten further, you sense the unspoken understanding settling in. Some winters are final. Not every loss is fought. Some are accepted, mourned quietly, and folded into memory. You adjust blankets gently, careful not to wake them. Breath is shallow, but steady. For tonight at least, winter hasn't taken them. And you understand that survival here isn't only about staying alive. It's about carrying each other as far as possible, until cold finally decides otherwise. As winter deepens, explanations become as important as solutions. When cold lingers too long, when sickness doesn't lift, when someone doesn't wake up, you search for meaning. Not because meaning fixes anything, but because it gives shape to fear. Winter breeds superstition the way summer breeds flies. You hear it in whispered warnings and half-joking advice passed along the hearth. Don't whistle at night, it invites the cold wind inside. Don't sleep facing north, it lets frost steal your breath. Don't anger whatever watches winter roads. A historical fact anchors this mindset. Medieval people commonly interpreted extreme weather and prolonged winters as signs of divine displeasure or supernatural imbalance, blending Christian belief with older folk traditions. Cold becomes personal, it has intent, it listens, you act accordingly. Here's a quirky detail pulled from folklore collections. In some regions, people believed frost crept in through cracks like a living thing, so they marked doorways with symbols or stuffed them obsessively with straw to confuse it. These beliefs don't replace practical knowledge, they sit beside it. You still layer wool, you still bank embers. But superstition fills the gaps where control ends. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval superstition increased anxiety or reduced it. Some argue fear of punishment worsened stress. Others suggest belief systems gave people psychological tools to endure uncontrollable hardship. From inside winter, belief feels like armour, even if it's imaginary. You see charms hanging near beds, bits of iron, carved wood, saints' medals, pagan symbols quietly tolerated. When survival is at stake, ideology softens. Here's a fringe fact that feels eerily calm. Some people believed speaking openly about death in winter invited it sooner, so losses were discussed indirectly, through metaphor and silence. Words were thought to carry cold with them. Weather watching becomes ritualized. Unusual clouds, ringed moons, sudden thaws. Each sign is read for meaning. Winter turns everyone into an amateur prophet. Children absorb these beliefs early. They learn where not to step, what not to say, when to stay close. Fear becomes instruction. You don't laugh at superstition. Not now. Winter humbles certainty. When logic can't guarantee survival, belief steps in. As night falls again, someone murmurs a prayer. Not loud, not formal. Just enough to feel less alone. You don't question whether it works. You only notice that the room feels steadier afterward. Winter strips life down to essentials. Warmth, food, company. And meaning, however fragile, becomes one more thing that keeps people breathing. You pull your cloak tighter, glance at the door, and follow every ritual you've been taught. Not because you're sure they're true, but because winter is not the time to test what might be. Somewhere deep in winter, when darkness feels heavier than cold, people decide not to endure quietly anymore. This is when festivals appear, not because conditions improve, but because morale can't survive on patience alone. You feel the shift in the village before anyone names it. There's a hum beneath the exhaustion, something planned, something shared. Winter festivals don't bring warmth, but they bring light. Candles are lit more freely than usual. Fires burn a little longer. Food stores loosen their grip just enough to allow celebration. Not abundance, never that, but intention. A historical fact anchors this moment. Medieval winter festivals such as Christmas, Yule, and Epiphany were deliberately placed during the darkest months to reinforce social bonds and psychological resilience when survival was most uncertain. You gather with others, packed close in homes or halls, bodies turning cold air into something almost tolerable. Voices overlap, stories repeat. Laughter comes easier tonight, even if it fades quickly afterward. Here's a quirky detail historians love. Winter festivals often included deliberate rule-breaking. Loud music, mock authority, exaggerated costumes, because inversion of order provided emotional release during a season defined by restriction. Food tastes better tonight, even though it's mostly the same. A bit more fat, a bit more bread, maybe a rare piece of preserved meat. You eat slower, savouring not just flavour, but the permission to enjoy it. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval winter festivals genuinely improved survival outcomes, or simply masked hardship. Some argue morale directly affects endurance. Others say festivals were symbolic pauses, not practical solutions. Standing here, you feel the truth lean toward both. Children are allowed to stay up longer. Elders tell familiar stories again. Songs carry memory forward, reminding everyone that winter ends eventually, because it always has before. Here's a fringe fact that feels surprisingly strategic. Some lords intentionally distributed food during winter festivals to prevent unrest. Celebration doubled as social pressure valve. The cold doesn't leave. You still wear every layer, you still huddle. But for a few hours, winter loses its grip on your thoughts. When the gathering breaks up, night rushes back in. Darkness feels deeper by contrast. But something has shifted. You walk home steadier, warmed not by fire, but by belonging. Winter survival isn't only physical, it's emotional. And tonight that balance tips just enough in your favour. You bank the fire again, curl into bed, and carry the echo of voices with you into sleep. Proof that even in the coldest months, people find ways to feel alive. Not every winter can be softened by tradition or shared songs. Some winters strip even hope down to bone. You feel it when food stores shrink faster than planned, when bread grows thinner, when conversations circle the same quiet fear. There may not be enough. Famine doesn't arrive suddenly. It creeps. One poor harvest becomes a tight winter, two become catastrophe. Cold preserves food, but it also prevents production. Once stores are gone, there is nowhere to turn. A historical fact anchors this grim reality. Medieval Europe experienced repeated winter famines, often triggered by crop failures and worsened by prolonged cold, leading to mass starvation and social collapse in severe cases. You ration carefully now. Portions shrink, meals are skipped. Hunger becomes a constant companion, dull and aching rather than sharp. Cold feels worse when the body has nothing to burn. Here's a quirky detail pulled from famine accounts. People described hunger as a kind of cold inside the body, a hollow chill that warmth alone couldn't touch. Winter and starvation blurred together. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how often medieval peasants resorted to extreme measures during famine. Evidence suggests some did, eating seed grain, slaughtering breeding animals, even abandoning land. Survival sometimes meant destroying the future. You see desperation change behaviour. Theft increases, trust strains, community frays at the edges. Winter tests not just endurance, but ethics. Here's a fringe fact that feels chillingly practical. During severe famines, some villages suspended normal laws around food theft, recognising that punishment wouldn't stop hunger. Order bends when survival is at stake. Children cry more quietly now. Energy is too precious. Elders weaken rapidly. Bodies already strained by cold have nothing left to give. You stretch stews thinner, adding water and hope. Bread is extended with anything grindable. Taste fades. Only texture remains. When famine passes, if it does, memory of it lingers for generations. People mark time by the hungry winter. Preparation changes. Fear remains. You sit with the emptiness, understanding that winter survival isn't guaranteed. Not every story ends well. Many didn't. And yet, even here, people endure longer than expected. They adapt. They share when they can. They wait. Winter doesn't always kill with cold. Sometimes it waits for hunger to finish the job. At some point, winter stops feeling like an ordinary season and starts feeling like something has shifted underneath the world itself. The cold lasts longer. Rivers freeze more solidly. Snow falls where elders swear it never used to. You don't have the language for climate change, but you feel the pattern tightening. You're standing on the edge of what historians will later call the Little Ice Age. A historical fact anchors this turning point. Beginning in the late Middle Ages, roughly the 14th century onward, Europe experienced a series of colder decades marked by harsher winters, advancing glaciers, and frequent crop failures. Conditions now grouped under the term Little Ice Age. To you, it's not an era. It's a run of bad winters that don't seem to end. Each year, preparations begin earlier. Fuel stores are bigger when possible. Straws saved more carefully. People speak about cold with a new seriousness. Jokes disappear. Winter is no longer a test. It's a threat that feels permanent. Here's a quirky detail found in town records. During especially cold years, bells cracked, wine froze solid in barrels, and even ink froze in inkwells. These weren't poetic descriptions. They were notes of disbelief. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how quickly people noticed long-term cooling. Some argue medieval populations adapted without naming it, while others suggest awareness spread rapidly through shared experience. From your position, it doesn't matter what it's called. It's colder than it should be, and it keeps happening. The Little Ice Age amplifies everything you already struggle with. Fuel shortages worsen, hunger sharpens, disease lingers longer. What was once survivable becomes lethal. Coastal ice traps ships. Trade slows. Inland routes vanish under snow. Regions that relied on imported grain suffer first. Isolation deepens. Here's a fringe fact that feels almost surreal. During some of the coldest winters, people held frost fairs on frozen rivers like the Thames, celebrations born not from joy, but from astonishment that water itself had turned solid. But for peasants, there's nothing festive about it. Ice means delayed planting. Delayed planting means hunger. Hunger means death. You hear elders say winters weren't always like this. You believe them. Their memories become warnings rather than nostalgia. Communities adapt where they can. New crops are tried. Storage improves slowly, but adaptation lags behind climate. Winter moves faster than culture, and still, people survive. Not because conditions improve, but because humans compress their lives around what's possible. They shrink expectations. They endure colder, longer, darker years. As you pull your cloak tighter against a cold that feels heavier than memory, you understand that medieval peasants didn't just survive winter. They survived a world growing colder around them, without knowing if it would ever warm again. By now, you've seen enough winters to understand something fundamental. Peasants didn't survive because they were stronger, smarter, or tougher than you. They survived because survival was the only option, and every part of life bent itself around that truth. Endurance here isn't heroic, it's habitual. You wait cold because you always have. You ration because you learned early. You layer wool, share beds, bank embers, eat slowly, and move carefully, not because anyone taught you in a classroom, but because winter punished mistakes immediately. A historical fact anchors this realization. Medieval peasants developed deeply ingrained seasonal behaviors, food storage, housing adaptation, labor rhythms, that functioned as informal survival systems passed down through experience rather than written instruction. Resilience becomes muscle memory. You don't debate whether to save fuel, you just do it. You don't question sleeping clothed, you always have. Comfort never enters the calculation. Here's a quirky detail that captures this mindset. Medieval proverbs about winter rarely mention suffering. They mention preparation. Summer feeds winter. He who saves straw sleeps warm. Wisdom favours foresight, not complaint. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval peasants were psychologically hardened by constant hardship or simply lacked alternatives. Some argue resilience emerged from adaptation. Others say it was forced acceptance. Standing here, the difference feels academic. You endure either way. You notice how little emotional energy is spent on anger at winter itself. The cold isn't blamed. It's expected. Frustration is reserved for human failures. Hoarded grain, broken promises, poor planning. Children grow up watching this. They absorb it without explanation. By adulthood, survival behaviours feel natural. Winter becomes background noise, not a crisis. Here's a fringe fact that feels quietly profound. Archaeological evidence suggests medieval peasants often lived shorter but more seasonally attuned lives, with bodies adapting metabolically to cycles of feast and scarcity. Survival rewired them. You realise endurance also comes from lowered expectations. Warmth is relative. Full is relative. Safety is relative. When the goal is simply still breathing, small successes matter more. Community reinforces this mindset. Everyone around you lives the same way. No one asks for more than is possible. Comparison doesn't exist the way it does now. As another night settles in, you bank the fire without resentment. You pull wool close without complaint. You sleep lightly because that's how winter sleep works. Peasant survival isn't a secret technique. It's 1,000 small habits stacked together, repeated every year, refined by loss and memory. And when spring finally comes, muddy, late, imperfect, it doesn't feel miraculous. It feels earned. Because winter didn't defeat you. You outlasted it. You don't notice the end of winter all at once. There's no announcement, no dramatic shift. It loosens its grip slowly, almost reluctantly, as if testing whether you've truly learned what it tried to teach. Snow melts unevenly. Ice thins on streams. The sun lingers a little longer in the sky. None of it feels warm yet, but it feels possible. You step outside and smell damp earth for the first time in months. Mud replaces frost. It's messy, exhausting, and absolutely welcome. Spring here isn't gentle, it's work. But it's different work. The kind that leads somewhere. A historical fact anchors this transition. Medieval agricultural calendars revolved around spring recovery, with survival of winter determining not just population, but labour capacity for the coming year. Those who lived now had to rebuild. You take stock of what winter took and what it spared. Tools worn thin, straw nearly gone, bodies lighter, some voices missing. Survival always leaves a ledger. Here's a quirky detail that feels strangely modern. Medieval peasants often marked the end of winter not by temperature but by sound. Running water, birds returning, animals stirring more actively. Life announces itself quietly. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval winters shaped long-term worldview. Did constant exposure to hardship make people pessimistic? Or simply realistic? Standing here, you feel something closer to clarity. Winter stripped life down to essentials, and what remains feels honest. You don't romanticize what you endured. Cold was dangerous. Hunger was real. Loss was permanent. But you also don't dismiss it. You survived without heaters, insulation, or guarantees. Not comfortably, but collectively. Here's a fringe fact that feels like a final lesson. Medieval sayings often warned against early celebration of spring. Frost could return. Hope had to stay cautious. You carry that forward. Preparation doesn't end with winter. It resets. As fields soften, work shifts again. Seeds go into ground that remembers cold. Bodies adjust back to movement. Sleep deepens, meals slowly improve. Winter hasn't made you stronger in a heroic sense. It's made you precise, careful, aware of how fragile comfort really is. And as you stand in this in-between moment, no longer frozen, not yet warm, you understand something medieval peasants knew deeply. Survival isn't about defeating nature. It's about learning its limits, and your own. You turn back towards shelter, already planning for the next cold season, because there will always be another one, and next time you'll be ready again. Now, as we slowly step back into the present, take a moment to notice the quiet around you. Maybe there's a hum of modern life nearby, a heater clicking on, distant traffic, a soft glow from a screen. All of that would have felt impossibly luxurious to the people you just lived among. Medieval peasants didn't survive winter because they mastered it. They survived because they adapted together to conditions that never promised comfort or safety. Warmth was borrowed, food was measured, sleep was light. Life continued anyway. And that's the strange comfort of history at bedtime. It reminds you that humans have endured far worse nights than this one, and still woke up. So as you settle in, maybe under a blanket that actually traps heat, remember how precious that simple warmth is. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let the cold stay outside where it belongs. You made it through tonight's journey, and unlike our medieval companions, you get to sleep warm.